This episode is going to profile one of the Nuestra Familia's most violent and deadliest members, Cornelio Tristan, or Corny from Woodland. At the age of 16, Corny was sent to DVI prison, Dual Vocational Institute in Tracy, California, for allegedly killing a taxi cab driver. According to numerous newspaper articles and court transcripts, Corny stabbed and killed the taxi cab driver so that he could rob him and use the money to buy more cans of polyurethane spray paint. Unlike other troubled teenage kids who grew up experimenting with some of the more common forms of hardcore drugs, Corny developed an addiction to an unconventional type of drug by huffing bags of polyurethane spray paint, paint thinner, or other inhalants like Elmer's rubber cement. While others were chasing the dragon or trying to feel that chest-pounding rush from a healthy fix of ether-based cocaine, Corny was enjoying the hallucinations and imaginary perceptions that are triggered by these types of inhalants. Since the age of 12 until his current age of 59, Corny has only enjoyed 8 months of freedom. Using prison jargon, or an argot used primarily by criminals who are familiar with this lifestyle, Corny is what is often referred to as stay raised. Before he was sent to DVI for killing the taxi cab driver, he had already spent a substantial time in CYA, California Youth Authority, for a variety of crimes that he had committed as an adolescent. At the time Corny was sent to DVI, this particular prison was called Gladiator School due to the fact that it was a prison used to house CYA rejects, juvenile offenders who were sentenced as adults, or 90-day op commitments that were usually young first-time offenders. Soon after arriving at DVI, Corny began associating himself with the Nuestra Familia and was already being closely watched as a potential NF recruit. When it came to violence or committing acts of violence, Corny and his proclivity to kill other inmates was something that struck fear into even some of the other NF killers that were also putting in work. Another inmate that would later testify in one of his criminal trials stated, "Corny is a cold-blooded killer who never hesitated to kill on behalf of the NF." A year later, when he was 17, he was accused of stabbing to death another inmate at DVI. He was acquitted of the crime in which the inmate, Francisco Padilla, was stabbed 102 times in his own cell, then stuffed under the bunk. Despite other inmates testifying that they actually witnessed Corny as he was stabbing Padilla and then seeing him strip out of his bloody state-issue clothes and passed him off in a bag to another inmate, the jury acquitted Corny after several of the key witnesses were caught lying and perjuring themselves under oath. When Corny was 29, he was again tried and convicted for the stabbing murder of a Mexican mafia member by the name of Arturo Big Artie Lamoya, another inmate at DVI. Corny, with a knife in each hand, approached Lamoya on a tier walkway. He called to Lamoya from behind. When Lamoya turned around, Corny stabbed him more than 30 times, then left him to die. Lamoya did in fact die, which earned Corny another 7-to-life sentence. But by this time, Corny didn't care. He had already been recruited into the NF and didn't have any real expectations about ever getting back out of prison again. He's been described by other former NF members in debriefing reports as a through-and-through NF loyalist, someone who truly believes in the NF organization and someone who has dedicated his entire being to the NF. From my own personal experience and having done time up in Pelican Bay Shoe with Corny, I can honestly say that he also had a lasting impression on me as well. He's someone that takes his Mexican heritage and his American Indian roots very serious. What I mean by that is this: Corny celebrates and pays tribute to his Mexican heritage every year on September 16th, the day Mexico declared its independence from Spain in 1810. He's also a very talented artist, and his Mexican-themed drawings were always on display in his cell. As far as his American Indian roots, he pays equal tribute to this culture as well by praying and meditating in the month of November, which is commonly referred to as the Native American Heritage Month. When I first met Corny in the shoe program at Pelican Bay, I honestly expected him to be something different than what he was. I had heard some of the stories about him where he had killed 3 or 4 other inmates, and then I had also heard about how he was putting it down in Corcoran's shoe when we were going out to the gladiator fights. I guess I was expecting him to be a big dude that was aggressive and who was covered with tattoos. But what I got when I met him was something completely different. He had some size on him from someone who obviously worked out daily, but he just wasn't no big ass dude. He had long hair that he kept in a tightly wrapped ponytail. He didn't have any visible tattoos, and he had a real laid-back, quiet demeanor about himself. When he spoke, he was very articulate, respectful, and he didn't use any profanity in his vocabulary. He was completely against this and perceived it as a form of disrespect, so he obviously expected to be addressed in the same way. There's no doubt in my mind that Corny quickly climbed the rungs of that organizational leadership ladder because of the bodies he dropped for the organization and just because he exemplified an ability to be a good leader. Corny got his chance to be part of the NF's upper echelon right around the time Robert Brown Bob Viramontes was killed. Key OGB members, organizational governing body members, like Brown Bob, were either murdered, defected, or were expelled from the organization. Rafa Rubio from Fresno was expelled after he was charged with treason for trying to propose a peace treaty with the MA without first advising other NF leaders of his plan. Vincent Chente Arroyo defected after being indicted in Santa Clara County and after he faced a possible death sentence. And then on April 19, 1999, Robert Brown Bob Viramontes was killed in Campbell, California, after he was also charged with treason for his unclear position in the chaos. His ex-cellmate, Art Big Smiley Ramirez from Salinas Cause and D facility. These three vacancies in the NF leadership opened the door for Corny and others like him, such as Tibbs, Skip, Huete, and Stort. Joseph Pinky Hernandez from Rancho Cucamonga and David D.C. Cervantes from Chino were already part of the organization's leadership. In the early to mid-90s, Corny was officially voted in to fill one of the three top offices as a general. He was voted in as the SRG, Street Regimental General, who was basically tasked with overseeing all the operating street regiments in Northern California. Joseph Pinky Hernandez was voted in as the GOP, General of Prisons, or General of Pintas. And James Tibbs Murado from San Jose was voted in as the GAO, General Advocate's Office. The GOP controlled and overseen all the prisons in California, and the GAO is commensurate to the organization's internal affairs, who oversees all the organization's internal investigations, who settles all disputes, and who mediates over any personal conflicts. Since Corny was voted in and appointed to fill one of the three high offices of high command, he has shown an unabated pursuit to become one of the organization's most staunchest leaders, not just by way of mouth, but more so by way of action. There's no question about the fact that the 80s and 90s were some of the bloodiest and most violent decades going back in the history between the Nuestra Familia and the Mexican Mafia. Murders became commonplace and the conflict was at its peak in these days. Bodies were being dropped on both sides, and this should be taken literally. Now recently, there's been a profusion of rhetoric that's been propagated by those who I consider to be your typical self-proclaimed gang experts, or those who consider themselves to be the go-to pundits for law enforcement, simply because they can recite some of the historical facts and some of the particular events that have transpired over the years. This doesn't qualify you as an expert, but I'm just saying though. And don't get me wrong, some of the information is accurate and is factually based. However, when some of the details get spun up or embellished for the purpose of enhancing one group over another, it all becomes malarkey and horse feathers, or otherwise bullshit. What I'm speaking on is this big controversy or this pea-brain debate that has recently erupted because of this one YouTube simpleton claiming that his former gang, the Mexican Mafia, has more kills than the Nuestra Familia. My gang's tougher than your gang. Now on its face, the whole argument just seems asinine and pointless. It is. Because what you have is in essence one of the biggest defectors from the MA making false claims and generating false narratives for God knows for what. Maybe he's just trying to pretty up his former clique, and maybe he's just trying to hype it all up for self-image purposes. I can't call it. But this is the thing I have a problem with right here. If you're going to preach the gospel and educate people about prison gangs and the historical facts, then tell the truth and be a stickler when it comes to the facts. Especially if you're going to portray yourself as the gang expert or the go-to pundit for law enforcement. Now, the other thing that amazes me about this whole charade is that there's no doubt in my mind that all the haters are gonna pop out of their little shitholes and criticize me for correcting this fool and for simply setting the record straight. I guess I'm just supposed to stay mum and not say nothing at all. Not me. Like I've said so many times before, I'm not the one keeping tally or acting like a proverbial cheerleader for my former team. My only purpose is to make sure that people get the facts and that they're not fed this spun up Hollywood bullshit. I personally don't give two shits about who has more kills, who has more stabbings, or who is more violent. I don't have a vested interest one way or the other, so let the record reflect. Now, before I get back into this spill, let me just say this. I don't understand why there's so many people out there who seem to think that this dude, and you all know who I'm talking about when I say self-proclaimed gang expert, Mr. YouTube sensation himself, seem to think that everything he says is irrefutable facts and that he's bogged down with credibility. You cats that think this and who pop out of your little shitholes with lengthy rebuttals are pathetic. I never seen so many people who are just willing to drink the Kool-Aid and put so much faith in hogwash in my life. Moving on. The following information I'm about to provide isn't being provided to score any points in this debate or to rub it in anyone's faces. That's not what I'm about. It's just being provided for the purpose of discrediting Mr. Gang Expert himself, and to just ensure that those of you who are seeking the historical facts between these two organizations get the real facts and not all that watered down bullshit. Aside from Arturo Big Artie Lamoya that Corny killed in DVI, these are some of the other MM members that have been killed over the years that are substantiated by actual newspaper articles. This particular article documents the murder of a known Mexican mafia member by the name of Edward Celino Lopez that took place in San Quentin State Prison on May 29, 1969. Lopez's mutilated body was found stabbed to death beneath a pile of towels in the prison gym. Death was attributed to a massive skull fracture, although death also could have been from the 4 deep knife wounds to his back. Also around his neck was a garrote to keep him from crying out while he was being killed. According to the PIO, Prison Information Officer Lee DeBoer, the inmate identified as Lopez was a brother in the Mexican Mafia. I'm sure there's going to be those naysayers who are going to claim that this guy was an associate or that the Prison Information Officer didn't know what he was talking about. But this is a baseless argument that holds no water. 2 other killings that took place in San Quentin were the fatal stabbings and killings of 2 other documented Mexican Mafia members, Archie Gallego, 25, serving 3 years to life, and Ramon Amado, 27, convicted of robbery from LA County. These incidents were a planned attack initiated by the Nuestra Familia in retaliation for an NF member that was stabbed the day prior. Between 1:45 and 2:25 p.m. in South Block and East Block, 2 attacks were initiated simultaneously in separate parts of the prison located on the upper yard. In total, 9 Mexican Mafia members were stabbed and assaulted that day in what was described as an NF full court press. Gallego died that same day, immediately following the skirmishes, despite efforts made by medical staff to save his life. The other inmate who died, Amado, was taken to the prison infirmary where he underwent immediate surgery but later died of his wounds. Another notable killing of a high-ranking Mexican Mafia member was the killing of Mike Acha Eisen on March 25, 2001. Acha, a San Francisco native, was chased down and beat over the head with pool sticks on a late Sunday night in downtown San Francisco, south of Market Street. Ironically, what started out as a fight between 2 other guys ended up being a free-for-all on Acha when they realized who he was. Acha's mistake of openly flaunting his status as an active member of the Mexican Mafia finally caught up to him after he collapsed in the intersection of 6th and Mission Streets after being chased down and beaten by 2 guys with pool sticks. His body was found later that night, laying between a beauty salon and the Pow Wow cocktail lounge. This was bound to happen as Acha had put himself on the NF's radar in the mid-90s. He lived a violent life and he died a violent death. That's the irony. In prison, Acha was considered a very violent character to fellow inmates. He was a powerful ally or a feared executioner. At 21, he was convicted for assault with a deadly weapon, and then later that same year, he was convicted for manslaughter after slaying a fellow inmate. In Folsom Prison, he was known for committing a gruesome murder in the prison chapel where he slit open an inmate's stomach and tossed his guts around the spews. But on the streets, Acho was just another dope fiend addicted to heroin, a vice born and sustained in prison. Now, it's obvious that this war between the NF and the MA resulted in a lot of casualties that extended from behind the walls of prison to the streets. I'm sure nobody denies this, but the last misconception that needs to be understood is this. Mr. Gang Expert would lead you to believe that by proxy or geographical sector that the MA were a bunch of ruthless hard knocks and the NF were somehow a bunch of inferior pussies, just based on loyalty somehow dictated whether or not you were a coward or a soldier. This is another farce and a serious misleading of the facts. Truth be told, that the NF may not have been feared in the very beginning stages of evolvement, but later on when they became established and organized, they were a force to be reckoned with and they were feared by their opposition. I'm not going to give you any history lessons here, but I will say this. After the NF struck the MA and declared war, the NF became the guiding light and the voice of all the people who had ever been abused by the MA. Everyone in the prison system was asking about this gang that was flourishing and who had finally stood up to the MA. So many guys were being recruited that CDC began calling the NF the blooming flower. For some of you hardcore believers of the dark side, here's some articles that actually document this and put it all in perspective. Don't take my word for it. It's all documented right here. I'm going to be doing more profiles on other individual NF members like Corny soon, so hopefully some of you enjoyed this. Let me just be clear on something again. Unlike others out there on YouTube who have an agenda or who inflate their historical accounts with a bunch of fluff, that's not what I'm about. I have nothing to gain either way by embellishing the facts or by fabricating these stories with my own details. And again, the purpose of drafting this narrative wasn't to score any points or to get caught up in all the games that this cat is playing. It was simply for the purpose of setting the record straight and to just get the real facts out there that some of you are searching for. In closing, let me just say this. This started out being a profile on Corny, and then it kind of segued into another area that I wanted to cover. In the future, this won't happen. I'll just stick to the profile and whoever I'm covering.